Welcome to a Grab the Mic webinar from the Beam Exchange. This is our regular opportunity to share information and ideas, experiences and lessons from people with practical knowledge about applying market systems development to various kinds of challenges in the field. If you're interested in presenting here, you can contact us in future. But for the time being, today, feel very privileged to be able to introduce three speakers, Silas Ochieng, who is the MERL, Monitoring, Evaluation, Results and Learning Director for a program called IRiS in Somalia, and Alexandra, Cervini, Mull, and Jason Wares, who are from Itad, a consultancy company that did a lot of evaluation work. And they're going to be talking about using evidence to guide the design of interventions in a program in Somalia. And this is, for me personally, this is really exciting because we talk a lot about evidence, but actually seeing it being applied to the design of new programs, not just as an exercise in accountability, but as an exercise in trying to do programming better in future. I think this is really interesting, and I was very impressed by the material that these people are going to be presenting. Anyway, I'm taking up their speaking time. So without much further ado, please bear in mind you can ask them questions in the Q&A box, or you can chat in the chat box. But let me hand over to Alexandra, first of all, so she can begin and introduce us to this seminar today.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining. Today, we'll be presenting on using evidence to guide intervention design for the inclusive resilience in Somalia activity. The program is also known as IRiS, as Mike mentioned. The presentation is based on an evidence review exercise that Itad undertook on behalf of the IRiS consortium last year. Next slide. Given the time limit, we're going to present a brief overview of the evidence review exercise, some case studies of programs we included in the review, how the program used the evidence review exercise to inform IRiS's program and intervention design, and then some key findings and recommendations at the end. We'll save 30 minutes for Q&A with the panel as well. Next slide. You can see here an overview of the IRiS program. It's a 5-year program that started in the summer of 2022 and works in the geographical focal zone for USAID in Somalia. You can see the specific areas on the slide where the program works. The IRiS consortium includes DT Global, who's the prime, Mercy Corps, Save the Children, Somali Agricultural Technical Group, and Itad. The goal of IRiS is to accelerate economic development for marginalized groups using a market systems development approach. And IRiS's strategy is to increase individual, household, business, community, and system-wide resilience through rural and urban livelihood diversification and promoting inclusive economic market systems. Next slide. Initially, there were 6 program results area for the program based on the original theory of change. This was changed after year 1, and it is now 4 program results, as listed here in the red box on the right-hand side. That said, when we undertook the evidence review, it was during year 1, so we focused on the 6 program results as listed in the blue box on the left side. And the report is structured and focused on these 6 program results, or what we call PRs. Silas, can you jump in and briefly touch on how and why the PRs changed after year 1?
All right, thank you, Ali. So at the beginning of the program, when we began during the inception phase, we had these 6 result areas. With the first result area was focusing on expanding climate resilient agricultural systems, facilitate the integration of displaced persons, promoting investments and remittances, support private sector expansion, and strengthening economic agency of marginalized households, and support inclusive markets. So this was the 6 result areas. As we went into implementation, we realized there was a lot of overlap. So following the year 1 implementation, during the pause and reflect session, we merged some of these into result areas. So currently we are focusing on 4 result areas. That is strengthening the key market systems in Somalia. That is the agriculture, fisheries, livestock. And also we have a very big shift of rural people migrating to urban areas. So there's a complete focus on the urban poor, not just the displaced persons. And also there's a very strong element on private sector engagement, where we work with the private sector to expand service delivery to the marginalized areas. And also we work around policies and regulations to expand market access and provide the enabling environment in these key market systems. So that's where the current focus of the program. And so far, we have very solid interventions in agriculture, fisheries, agriculture, and also a very big shift and focus on the urban poor. So we'll discuss more of this in details in the coming, slides. Thanks. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you so much, Silas. Next slide, please. So Itad undertook the evidence review from October 2022 until May 2023. And the purpose of the review was to collate, synthesize evidence to inform intervention design for IRiS. In doing so, we gathered and summarized evidence related to IRiS's interventions and to support the theory of change-based programming decisions. We also identified gaps in evidence to inform further research and learning activities for the program. In undertaking the evidence review, as mentioned before, we focused on the 6 IRiS original program results from the theory of change, looking at similar programs and interventions in the region to see if they produced results at 4 different levels, specifically at the intervention level, the systems level, results in growth of services, and poverty reduction results levels. You can see on the slide how we define each of the results levels. The evidence review exercise report presents evidence from successful projects using similar interventions and aiming to achieve similar results to IRiS. And it brings together findings and evidence from many reports produced from programs in the region similar to what IRiS is hoping to achieve. Next slide. On this slide, you can see the sources that we use, generally speaking, as well as how many materials we started with. You can see we started out with 139 reports and data sets, and then only 42 of them were found to actually have evidence, and that could be used to create what we called evidence summaries. And that's what the report was based on. Most documents that we either found through partner requests, reaching out to different programs, as well as our own search. But a lot of them were excluded because they only included descriptive statistics, project descriptions, narrative text, or were contextual analysis and didn't actually have evidence, or they comprised redundant information about the same project, or were out of scope in terms of time period or geographically speaking. Just for reference, we focused on Somalia first and then expanded to the wider East Africa region and only included reports from 2015 onward. Next slide. Next, Jason will present some of the examples of case studies that inform the evidence review. Jason?
Thanks, Ali. So now I'd like to provide you with 2 examples of pieces of evidence that we included in the review in the form of these 2 projects that we reviewed. We selected these projects because they had similar goals to IRiS, claimed success, and could back up those claims with high-quality data and analysis. The first case study is the Promoting Inclusive Markets in Somalia project, also called PIMS. It ran from 2015 to 2019. PIMS was an interesting project because while many projects in Somalia provide short-term relief, PIMS sought to create a similar type of transformational change that IRiS was aiming for and still is aiming for. The second project, Resilience Through Wealth in Agriculture and Nutrition project in Uganda, seems like an unlikely candidate to inform IRiS because it's not in Somalia and it was a bit dated, having run from 2012 to 2017. However, it was implemented in an area that had the highest levels of vulnerability in Uganda and included years of insecurity. It was also in an area that was subject to recurrent drought, like areas of Somalia that IRiS is working in. Also like IRiS, Rwanda sought to develop crop and livestock market resilience in a context characterized by violent conflict, health epidemics, and unpredictable weather events. So to start with PIMS, PIMS offered important lessons for IRiS in building resilient market systems by working through established actors while directly intervening where there were obstacles that local actors couldn't surmount. For example, PIMS brought together coalitions of fish processing farms and fish producers to build the capacity and trust needed to increase investment and create fish handling standards that international markets demanded. They also helped lead firms build extension services to improve incomes for everyone. And because they did it through established firms, it was more sustainable than relying on direct project interventions. That said, where local actors couldn't be effective, the project intervened directly. For example, the project advocated directly to the government to create policies in agricultural and fishery markets that would incentivize systems change and lead to market growth. This advocacy helped create policies for HACCP certified seafoods. You can see some of the project's achievements here. Spoilage was decreased, export markets grew, and income for firms and producers increased. Rwanda was an interesting case to study because of the way it used incentives to gradually change market-based behaviors. So that's a theme we return to continually throughout the report, using incentives to make gradual change. As anyone who works in agriculture markets knows, and we all do at one time or another, farmers can be very conservative, and rightfully so. The success or failure of their farming techniques could determine whether their family eats or not. Rwanda wanted farmers to buy new seed varieties that were more resilient to drought than the traditional varieties farmers relied on. The Rwanda project recognized that the risk of changing seed varieties might pose an unacceptable risk to farmers. So, the project implemented a strategy to incrementally change behavior. It started by distributing a number of seed starter kits that contained a variety of crops so that farmers could see that seeds produced quality crops. Then, Rwanda introduced a voucher system. At first, the farmer paid 30% of the value of the voucher, and Rwanda paid the remaining 70%. Over subsequent years, farmers paid a higher portion of the value until, by the end of the project, farmers' behavior had changed from seeking donations from government and other actors to directly purchasing seeds from agro-dealers. Rwanda used incentive systems like this to accomplish other objectives also, like bringing farmers, tractor owners, and credit providers together to increase tillage acreage. They also increased block farming, which increased the quality of crops and the price that farmers were able to get at market. You can see some of the impressive achievements of Rwanda's results here. These case studies were two examples of ways that we use projects and research innovation to inform IRiS's design. Here's a partial list of other sources that we reviewed, matching these projects' accomplishments and strategies and data to help inform IRiS. Silas, now on to you to talk a bit about how the evidence was used in IRiS.
Thank you, Jason. Maybe you can just go to the next slide. Yeah, the evidence review exercise was really an important exercise for IRiS, just to pick up on what has worked within Somalia and similar contexts. And that more or less formed the prioritization of the activities we implemented in year one. For example, learning from the FCDO-funded Commercial Agriculture and Smallholders Agribusiness Program in Uganda that worked in the sesame sector. The program worked through the private sector companies to engage the village-based agents to set up irrigation facilities, and that improved market access for the marginalized households. We used a similar context in Somalia, where we work with 6 private sector companies who export. Initially, these companies were doing their own production, and of course, they were not able to get sufficient volumes to meet the export demand. So learning from the CASA program, these companies, we co-shared in the training of the village-based agents, of which they trained about 120 village-based agents. These companies invested in rural aggregation facilities and also train the farmers. By this, the companies were able to expand their supply chain by additional 8,000 smallholder producers. And based on the initial evidence, these companies have been able to increase their sesame sourcing capacity from 39,000 metric tons to over 60,000 metric tons. That is a 72% increment. So learning from this, we want to replicate this model because it's worked in Uganda. We are seeing some early evidence and early signals in Somalia that's going to work. So this is a model that we want to replicate not only in the sesame sector, but also in other sectors where we intervene. Next slide, please. Yeah, also learning from Rwano, that's a program in Uganda where the companies worked with different smallholders to do the seed multiplication. In Somalia, we work in a very fragmented market where the market access is more or less bridged by the NGOs. So for the seed sector, we have NGOs getting seeds distributed to the farmers. And this model is not sustainable. So what did we do with an IRiS program? In year one, we worked with few companies, that is 3, to try their grower stream management program, whereby they engage the smallholders as growers with the seed they bought back from them. But later on, we realized, okay, there's another challenge where how does this seed get to the farmers? So we engage this companies to do promotion of their seeds and also to establish forward linkages with the agro-dealer networks. So this activity from the initial indication has been able to enable these companies increase their seed processing capacity by over 151%. And also, we are also seeing a very good forward linkage where the companies have a stronger connectivity with the agro-dealers. This model is more or less, providing initial indication that's going to work. And this is a model they want to replicate, whereby instead of just working around production, we think about expanding market access and strengthening the connection between the market actors. So this is a very good example of what we're learning in the seed sector. And also in the coming year, we want to bring in more, climate-resistant varieties and all these companies to be able to expand the production of these climate-resistant varieties by engaging their growers and also working through the established agro-dealer networks. They're able to push this seed now to the farmers. What is important here is about also just marking the incentives for the different actors. For the companies, they find it beneficial to engage their growers because they're able to increase their capacity. Their growers, in that case, they're also earning some income and adopting those varieties. And at the same time, the linkages established with the agro-dealer networks is important for their sustainable growth and expansion to new areas. Next slide. For the fisheries sector, learning from the FCDO-funded PIMS program that is between 2015 and 2019, our focus has been around expanding market access. And of course, we understand Somalia has the longest coastline of 3,300 kilometers, so much fish, but access to market is a challenge. This is a critical constraint we are trying to address as a program. And learning from previous programs, instead of working individual companies, we are coming now in to work with an association, that is the Somalia Seafood Export Association. This association comprises of 35 private sector companies, and we are working collectively to expand new markets. So what are we doing at the moment? We've commissioned an end market analysis study in the neighboring countries, that is DRC, Kenya, and Oman, to understand the demand for fish and what is required to get the fish from Somalia to these new markets. And also, what we've done, which is really bearing some fruit, is the B2B. Just last year, we organized this big conference where we brought in the private sector companies, the international buyers of fish, just to explore opportunities. And some very interesting outcome that we are already tracking is the companies that express interest. They already have a market and they want to source from Somalia. So we're just working around the modalities on how to catalyze that business to work out. And on this side, we are working around improving standards, and we're working with the Somali Bureau of Standards to have these regulations in place, the HACCP certifications, so that Somalia can be able to expand our fish. This we see as a very good opportunity to expand new markets and also provide opportunities for the marginalized fisher folks. And also on the side, on the downstream, we are working with the cooperatives, the companies, to engage the cooperatives to expand service delivery. Like now, if you look at the post-harvest loss in fish in Somalia, it's really high. So we have companies that are already producing ice, for instance, and they want to expand their production capacity so that many more fisher folks in the cooperatives in the supply chain can have access. So these are areas we are trying to work around, but we believe that the biggest catalyst for Somali fisheries is expansion to new markets. Next slide, please. On the livestock, we understand livestock sector is a key driver to the economy of Somalia and a greatest contributor to the GDP for the country. And some of the constraints, especially the recurrent drought, is really a big shock for these pastoral communities. So what we're doing, based on the systems analysis that we did at the beginning at the consultations, access to fodder is a critical, input in the system. So at the moment, during year one, we piloted the initial activities with a few community-based VSLAs, that is very serious and associations, to be able to grow fodder. And now in the second phase, we are partnering with private sector companies to engage the art growers so that they can expand their production capacity and to deliver this fodder in the rural areas where it's required most. So what are we doing? We are also trying to expand the, strengthen the milk supply chain. We have companies that are doing processing, but they are operating below capacity. Some of the constraints they face is the ability to get consistent supply of milk. So we're working with one company for a start. This just to pilot this model, whereby this company invest in the rural collection centers, and marginalized households are able to deliver the milk. The benefit to this is that the company will be able to increase its milk sourcing capacity and at the same time train the smallholders who are delivering milk in the collection centers. And over time, the plan is to be able to more or less transform these collection centers into one-stop shops. So let's say like now you have an outlet where the farmers can deliver milk, and also we have those who are producing fodder able to put it there, and also those who are providing veterinary services. So we more or less build a system around these collection centers that expands market access and services for the marginalized households. So these are the very clear examples of what we're doing in the IRiS program. And in the coming year, we're doing our planning just to expand some of these lessons learned from year one and how we're going to scale them up in the coming year. That is it from my side. Maybe Ali, do you want to move the next slide and talk about how we put this into?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Silas.
Thank you.
And now we'll present some of the key lessons to build on and recommendations from the evidence review. Next slide. So before we dive into the key lessons to build on, we should note that it is important to consider Somalia's dynamic context when judging the evidence that the report includes. Most of the projects reviewed or that were part of the evidence review were completed by 2021, and many before then. Since then, Somalia's experienced several changes since those programs have been completed that may affect the weight and prioritization that readers of the report may give to some key points of the evidence. That said, and in that context, I'm happy to share some of the key lessons to build on, and many of which IRiS program has already integrated into IRiS, as Silas has mentioned in his section previously. So the first one is successful projects use a training of trainer approach to promote sustainability and expand service delivery in marginalized areas. In doing so, project benefit can continue after a program ends. For example, with the PIMS program, they delivered training of trainers to lead firms in the fishing industry. Then lead firms staff provided training to their main suppliers, with lead firms adopting PIMS practices independently after the program concluded. Also related to the fishing industry, harvest loss management is likely to maximize impact, as well as developing commercial linkages between offtake companies, cooperatives, and fisher folks. In terms of livelihoods and skills development, life skills programming paired with skills training appears to have a positive effect on improving the chances of obtaining a job, especially among youth. Not just doing one or the other, but both together. For example, with the Kenya Youth Empowerment Project, a randomized controlled trial evaluation showed that life skills training had a positive effect on improving the chances of obtaining a job among female youth in Kenya. Projects that achieved results related to systemic change worked at multiple nodes in the value chain at the same time and recruited the private sector to implement activities to supplement those usually implemented directly by nonprofits. There was substantial evidence for the effectiveness of using private sector structures to deliver services versus direct delivery, as Jason touched on with some of his examples. Circling back to the fishing industry, programs successfully collaborated with the government to create an enabling environment to help fisher folks gain access to international markets. And that's something that IRiS has been focused on, as Silas mentioned in his fisheries section. Other projects could build on these developments by providing technical assistance to the government of Somalia to institutionalize the HACCP standards and food safety standards within the government and market system. And that's also something that IRiS is already doing. Next slide, please. Successful projects often created incentives that drove the change in market systems. As we saw with the PIMS program, it started with an information campaign among small producers to increase demand and progressed to incentivizing outgrower schemes and building supply and demand of higher quality fodder. Some projects showed potential for project-created structures, such as cooperatives or one-stop shops, to serve as significant job creators even after the project ended. In the seed sector, projects gradually introduced market mechanisms to incentivize farmers to purchase better seeds, an example through a voucher system. For example, with the Rwanu program, as Jason mentioned, by the end of the project, farmers were purchasing seeds directly from agro dealers in cash as they recognized the benefits of higher quality seeds. There are opportunities in agricultural sectors for IRiS to serve as a facilitator between smallholder farmers and communities and larger processing businesses in a way that increases income for smallholder farmers while reducing supply costs for the larger businesses. The last two include financial service projects demonstrated that potential for increasing financial services to rural communities while reducing risk for financial service providers. Other projects could build on this by supporting local enterprises to develop bankable business concepts, buying down risks to incentivize MFIs to increase credit access, and facilitating market linkages between producers and upstream off-takers. And finally, creating market linkages between urban and rural areas requires creative solutions that other projects can build on. For example, the Sustainable Urban Economic Development Program, SUED, propose an aggregation and collection system supported by improved storage and road access to improve linkages between rural growers and urban markets in Kenya. Now over to Jason to share some common characteristics and recommendations. Jason?
Thanks, Ali. So as you can see in our report, we provided common characteristics that successful projects shared and recommendations for how IRiS can understand it and use those characteristics. You heard from Silas about some of the recommendations that they took. We present here the way they're sort of provided in the report, which I hope you'll take a moment to look through and see some of the other recommendations and evidence that we provided. So some of the common characteristics and recommendations. Effective projects plan for evolution. The projects that created systemic change started with small changes that beneficiaries were ready to accept and gradually introduced more market-based incentives to change market systems. Evolving can also lead to an impact on individuals beyond the target group. Projects should design initiatives to evolve from incremental change in behavior to systemic change. Programs should also make sure that management is structured so that assumptions about stakeholders' behavior are recorded and tracked to allow for more flexible program implementation. This structure allows for program teams to frequently collect data from market actors and adjust initiatives to learn from new information. And we saw how this worked, particularly with the Rwanu project, the seed voucher system, and the access to tractor and tillage initiatives. The second characteristic was that achieving results requires coordination, specifically coordination with other programs and local organizations that are working on similar projects in sectors in the same country. It's also important for market systems development projects to work with local partners and lead firms and to track partner capacity through the project to make sure that partners do not get overextended, that they can deliver results that are assigned, and that they have the resources to meet objectives as they develop during the program. One program that was successful at coordination and building relationships was the GEAL program, which focused early on relationship building with actors in targeted value chains, with financial service providers and civil society organizations. This allowed them to quickly identify 22 important needs and opportunities that they could take advantage of. Embed activities in the market system. Delivering project interventions through lead firms, community members, cooperatives, and other entities embedded in the system seems to deliver more effective and sustainable results than direct delivery. For example, while the FAO Cash Plus project in Somalia effectively increased farm-level productivity, it was only to the extent that the program itself was able to provide inputs and deliver capacity-building trainings each season, and they had to repeat these initiatives each season. However, projects like GEAL, PIMS, Ruano, and Prime delivered many of their interventions through lead firms and community animal healthcare workers, cooperatives, and other actors embedded in the market system. These projects more effectively overcame risks inherent in their markets and established new systemic relationships that continued after the project was complete. Expanding access via technology. Projects that showed sustainable systemic success around expanding access to markets and services relied on digital linkages, as we show in our report in the AgFin program and the Mobile Money for the Poor program. The system needs cash and equipment. While the projects reviewed all sought sustainability, they also relied on cash and equipment grants to grow productive capacity, demonstrate the potential of new approaches, and buy down the risk associated with behavior change. Providing cash and equipment also increased demand. The Cash Plus intervention provided a basic demonstration of the need of cash in the system. Cash Plus provided cash, tools, and input grants with training in various combinations to enhance the livelihoods and product capacities of poor and vulnerable rural households in Somalia. Farmers that received interventions were more productive than farmers that just received seeds. However, farmers that received cash in combination with other benefits were more productive than farmers that did not receive cash. So while receiving interventions were more productive than just getting seeds, getting cash was the most productive over equipment and training. Finally, targeting women and youth. Nearly all the programs that achieved results related to women and youth had specific strategies for targeting these populations and collected monitoring data that was disaggregated by gender and age. This allowed them to track women and youth progress within project interventions. For sustainability, projects should identify and communicate the case for private sector partners to increase participation of women and youth in their supply chain. The FCDO funded Elan RDC program in the DRC fostered and supported female leaders through mentorship and coaching programs to lift confidence and expand their networks. The program developed a targeted product design, distribution strategy, and marketing messages when targeting women. In contrast, the PIMS program included incentives for lead firms to reach a certain quota or target number of women and youth. They included a quota system in their contracts with partners. However, they did not directly build the capacity of lead firms to effectively identify and train women and youth. Based on the analysis of the program, PIMS could have had more systemic impact by approaching the inclusion of women and youth from the perspective of the value proposition to lead firms instead of contractual quota requirements. So thank you very much for your attention, and we hope you get a chance to look through our full report. Please, here is our contact information. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make to us directly, please, we're always available. Feel free to reach out to Ali, Silas, or myself. And now we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Jason, and also Silas and Ali. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, they're really interesting, isn't it? There's quite a few questions coming in, I'm glad to say. But please do put more, and remember to put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, because I'm only looking at the Q&A box now. I'm going to kind of break it down into two sections. So there's some questions that relate to the methodology of the evaluation and of the review that you did, and other questions that relate to the actual work that IRiS is doing on the ground, as you look in Somalia. Let's begin with the second sort of issues, what's about how work is actually progressing, and then we'll move on to the questions about the methodology of your approach. Also, there are a couple of questions which I think Ali is answering in the text. So if you actually look, some of the questions we'll address through written responses if it's more appropriate. But let's have a look at a question from that was a great question. Let's take the one that Arthur Masuka put in the chat box because it's right in front of me. Silas, this is really for you. What sorts of activities did the program implement for harvest loss management in relation to fish? In Somalia, he says, fish handling and processing on board boats and on land has been known for some time to be very deficient and weak on issues to do with preservation, training, cold storage, and so on. So how is IRiS addressing these issues?
All right, thank you, Mike. It's very true that post-harvest loss management is a big problem in the fisheries sector in Somalia. Actually, this is one of the biggest contributors to the losses we see. And currently, we have private sector companies who are more or less, who invested on a small scale on ice production and fish preservation methods. So what we're doing now is to work through these existing companies to enable them expand. So we're trying to catalyze investments from commercial lenders so that they can be able to expand their ice production capacity and also to be able to supply the cooperatives around the coastal areas. So that is one. And two, there's deliberate effort to build the capacity of these cooperatives on fish handling, hygiene, and all that. So we look at the commercial companies with the incentive to buy fish from the companies, from the cooperatives. So these companies in the process need to invest in the training of these cooperatives. And two, the companies that are producing ice should be able to supply these cooperatives on a sustainable basis. So we are more or less working through the demand side, that is working to the companies with incentive to buy from the cooperatives, to do the trainings, and also the companies that are producing ice to be able to expand their ice delivery. And also on this side, we are working now on more or less about building a system that will catalyze export markets for Somalia. And of course, fish handling, post-harvest loss management are critical to enable them export. So what we're doing at the moment, instead of working with individual companies, we work now with the Somalia Seafood Export Association, because it's an umbrella body of these 35 companies that are able to integrate and buy from these cooperatives. So what we are doing on the side also with the Somali Bureau of Standards is to institutionalize the standards regulations in the sector. So we just provide the technical assistance so that they set up these regulations that need to be institutionalized in the sector. So that's the broader picture we have. But at the moment, I have to say, we are starting from what we know, especially working with the companies that are really buying from the cooperatives to deliver the trainings and also expanding ice production. So, but the bigger picture is to be able to have the regulation standards insurance in the sector so that there's compliance right from production to transport all the way to exports. That's how we're doing it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. By the way, you may not have noticed, but Isabel has been posting links in the chat box including to the report that we're discussing here. So please do read that report, have a look at it, because there's a lot of fascinating detail in there about the different programs that have been working in these kind of fragile and conflict-affected settings. There's a couple more questions maybe for you, Silas, or perhaps you for Ali. Ali might also come in just on things that you've been doing. So there was an interesting question about village savings and loans associations from Getene, pointing out, of course, that your linkages with VSLAs, Village Savings and Loan Associations, is critical for creating that kind of savings culture. Has there been an effort the question is, this tends to be more effective when women exercise full control over these kind of systems, these kind of associations. Has there been an effort to do that in IRiS, and how successful has it been?
Yeah, so I have to say, really, in year one, we piloted just a very simple intervention with the women VSLAs to enable them access to, credit. So we have these women who have come together, they're selling fish, but accessing the working capital is a problem. They try to save, but it's not really sufficient. So what we did was to strengthen the capacity of this VSLA and connect them to an MFI that was able to lend to them. So learning from that model, we want to now replicate this in other sectors, because you'll find that most of these VSLAs are women, controlled, and just having enough savings to be able to invest in their businesses is a challenge. So there's the element of bringing the private sector, that's the MFI on top, so that you strengthen the capacity of these VSLAs. They're able to put their savings, they're able to connect better with the banks, such that they can save now in formal financial institutions, at the same time be able to access credit. So that's one idea that we want to plan and replicate in the coming year. But so far, I think from the initial indications in year one, we have some good lessons we learned from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, sorry to jump around different topics, but there's also a question from Dick Tinsley about the work you're doing, or the work IRiS is doing with seeds and seed promotions and so on. He's curious as to whether you're working with hybrid seeds that require repurchasing every year, or whether you're also working with seeds that can be retained and reused by farmers on a multi-year basis.
Yeah, so what we're doing now, we're looking at the existing systems. Like we have these, seeds that you can reuse for the next season. So we are just working with the companies to be able to expand what is available in the market. But in the pipeline, what we are doing now is to bring new hybrids to the country. So already, for example, for the maize, we have this one seed variety that is almost 50% higher in yields as compared to the local variety. So we're working with a local private company to be able to expand the multiplication of that variety. Again, we have these companies that have come together, and now they want to try new varieties. In the coming year, we just want to expose them to new research centers in Kenya, where they can learn about these varieties, how they can grow, and all that. So I have to say, it's a gradual process. I have to appreciate we are working in a very fragile, fragmented market, and starting with what we have is very important to build the foundation as we progress into new varieties.
Thanks, Silas. Okay, let's move on to looking at some of the questions about the actual process of this evidence review itself, which Ali and Jason were talking about. There's some quite interesting questions about essentially, how did you do the evidence review? Now, Ali, you've already answered some of these questions in the written responses, but perhaps we could talk about some of those things so that everyone could hear it. Yeah, let's have a look. Maybe you could talk about why this was done as a desk review, and how many different programs you were able to draw on, and how you chose the ones that you focused your attention on as important and relevant for IRiS.
Yeah, so this was meant to be an internal process to help the IRiS program in terms of finalizing the interventions that they used and rolled out during year one and year two, and kind of help validate or challenge their theory of change in the intervention areas that they had included in their original theory of change. So, it wasn't forward-looking in terms of looking at what IRiS beneficiaries needed per se directly by doing KIIs. It was instead looking on what is their body of evidence that these plan interventions are going to work. And if no, how can we adjust them based on the evidence? And if yes, how can we strengthen them based on the evidence?
Ali, may I
it
mention
wasn't.
something here?
Go ahead.
So one of the reasons this was done as a secondary desk review rather than going out and doing primary research was there were two reasons really. I think donors were concerned that there was some exhaustion from the amount of research. They were seeing a lot of data being collected and they weren't using, maximizing the use of that data. And I think the other reason was at the time there was a, as is often the case, there was a crisis going on in Somalia. And those of us, if you do research, you're going out and ask people to give their time to inform your project, time that they could be using farming or preparing for their future or handling whatever difficult situations that they're facing. So I think the intention was to first make good use of the information that was on hand before we went out and collected primary data.
Exactly. Go ahead, Silas.
Thank you. So can I just follow that up? Because there's a couple of people have asked questions about how you assessed, given it was essentially a desk study, how you assessed the quality of the material that you were tapping into. Did you have sort of particular criteria for what to give weight to in different documents based on how they were produced? What were you looking for as kind of a quality assurance system, if you like, for the information that you're using?
Jason, do you want to take that?
Sure. So we had multiple reviewers. There were so many documents, we couldn't have one person go through all of them. And each reviewer, we had kind of a registry for each report or each piece of research or program evaluation that we reviewed. The reviewer would fill out the registry and rate the quality of the analysis or the quality of the data in the registry on a 3-point scale. Basically, it was like great, good, or bad, and then make notes about the reasons for that rating. And then at least one other reviewer, and often several other reviewers, would go back and review the notes that were made and then kind of skim through the report to make sure that we weren't excluding anything that actually contained good data or including anything that contained questionable data. And I think what we look for, is a sound methodology in the research. We looked at the sample design and the way the analysis was conducted. We looked for reports that clearly stated assumptions and clearly provided some, caveats to their findings. So reports that said, we found this project was great, but you should understand that in the context of X, Y, and Z were rated higher than ones that just provided kind of, super positive reviews about everything the project did. So that was the kind of the quick and dirty way we did it.
That's great, thank you. And there's a particular, so that kind of covers a question that Maria Gazau asked about whether there was a systemic way to do this. There was also a question from Al Richardson about whether impact on the environment was considered as a factor in designing in selecting the evidence that you use. Or were you looking for evidence about people taking kind of environmental sustainability or climate factors into account in the design of the programs or in the measurement of results?
So I can say from our perspective, it wasn't taken into consideration in the selection of the evidence. We didn't look at that, but just as it happens, because of recent trends, there's a ton of evidence of the way you do things like grow fodder for livestock or engage in fish handling and production. Most of the projects and research that we reviewed had environmental concerns and took those into consideration. It wasn't part of our mandate, but it just as it happens, it was part of it. And then Silas, was it taken into consideration in project design?
Yes, actually, for the program, we have a very robust environmental management and monitoring plan in place that was designed right at the beginning. And for every intervention we design, before implementation, we have to do a very thorough and robust environmental review assessment. And this is also more or less monitored on a quarterly basis. So we are very concerned that every intervention we deliver, we must ensure there's environmental sustainability and it's well taken care of in our planning. Thank you.
Okay. So Ali, there was a question early on from Multi, from Hex, about whether you had a chance. Well, two questions actually. So I'll take the second one first. The second question was, in particular, with regard to PIMS and the Uganda program, Rwanu. Did you have access to any more up-to-date information, like ex-post information about the results of those programs after,
No, and that's something that we noted when I was going through the key lessons to build on, and we note this in the report, that the evidence is based at like the time. Most of the evidence we're using is close to when the program ended. We don't know what happened years after the program ended. Unfortunately, a lot of donors don't like to invest funding into doing post-program research or evaluation work. It's really hard to justify. So there isn't a lot of data or a lot of programs that do that. So unfortunately, no, what the results that we speak to are typically within the end of the program, like a final evaluation or something. Yes, Silas?
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Some of the activities that were implemented in the PIMS program, which I happened to be there from the beginning up to the very end, and also GALE, some of the companies that were supported, actually we are just learning from them. For example, during PIMS, we had this company that invested so much in certification and standards in the supply chain. It was supported by GALE to achieve the HACCP standards. So learning from that company, we want to explore and now work through the association instead of working through individual companies. So already some of the activities that were implemented at PIMS and GALE, we see some evidence that the practices are being sustained, and we're learning from that now to expand and include more actors in that kind of space.
That's very interesting. So when you say you're learning from it, are you saying effectively that the learning is happening, but it's happening in a kind of informal way as a result of personal connections and relationships, rather than being formally documented through an ex-post evaluation or some kind of formal process?
Yeah, actually, for now, like some of the companies that received technical assistance from these two programs, like one big company in the fisheries sector that has attained the HACCP standards, we are learning what is the process, what does it require to attain that kind of standards. So this company walks us through the journey, and we want to replicate this to across the 35 of the private sector companies, so that all become HACCP certified. Yeah. So it's actually engaging and learning along the way.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, and we're doing the Beam Exchange is conducting an evidence review across a wide spectrum of market system development programs at the moment. This issue of ex-post evaluations is the lack of them. It's been an ongoing issue in 10 years that I've been doing this job. But it's really interesting, of course, because what the real learning is often not codified in evaluation documents, but it's something that happens in the staff that are retained through programs or move from one program to another, bring their relationships, their knowledge, their experience into bear. So as an industry, it would be great to see us doing more to capture that knowledge and make sure that it isn't just dependent on ad hoc, the luck that we get the right person in the right place who remembers or has the relationship. So I find it quite fascinating. We are running out of time, I'm afraid, and there's still questions coming in, which is great. So I'm going to try and field a couple more before we finish. But just before I do that, for those of you who are listening, please take the opportunity to let us know about this webinar. If you've got any feedback on it, if you want to give us any plaudits or criticisms, there's a feedback form which you'll see a link to in the chat. And you can just let us know what you thought about this webinar and how we can improve it. And also, of course, do remember to get in touch with us if you want to do something similar with your own program. So right at the beginning of your presentation, Ali, or was it you, Silas? I can't remember. You pointed out that there'd been a change in the key program results that IRiS has been asked to meet. And there's another question from Multi Rocheft about how the funders, which in this case USAID and FCDO, How do they react to this change in the program results, this big strategic level shift? How did that go down? How did you manage it?
Yeah, I have to say this was really more or less a very participatory process between the program and the two donors. So every year we have this annual pause and reflect where we look at what we've been able to learn through the process and also make adaptations. So these shifts came up during our last pause and reflect session, whereby we looked back into what we did in year one, the lessons learned, and where we felt there were overlaps. So that discussion during that PNR stimulated change that we actually implemented.
All right, thank you. Ali, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I mean, we were there for the pause and reflect of year one, so it was great. We actually represented this report to the full consortium at the pause and reflect at year one to help them kind of rethink the program results areas. So we were part of that process, but it was really led by like Silas and the course team of IRiS.
All right. Well, look, I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's been a very interesting and rich webinar. There's a lot of material crossing the screen, and I know that people would benefit from reading your report because there's a lot of more detail there that will really, I think, in a very practical way, give some insights, both for people doing work on the ground in fragile and conflict-affected settings, but also in relation to how you do these kind of evidence reviews and how we make them more common, more useful. I think some of the recommendations are really precious. So please do read the report and also look out for the evidence review that the Beam Exchange is going to be publishing in a few months' time. And it's underway at the moment. If you have any evidence that you think is not already in the public domain that we might not find on the Beam Exchange or elsewhere, please share it with me. We're looking for evidence from programs about the impact and the effectiveness of market systems development, both in fragile settings, but also in more stable settings. So I'd love to hear more. But again, thank you so much, Silas. Really interesting to hear. And thank you for being able to join us from Mogadishu. I know that's not always easy. And thank you, Ali and Jason, for your contributions and for this excellent overview report, which is going to really help us in the sector.